We are very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning, Libby Carr. Libby Carr is the campaign manager for wamend.org, the organization which is currently gathering signatures for Initiative 1329, the We the People initiative that would eliminate corporate contributions to political campaigns. Libby, thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks, Mike. Glad to be here.
So start out, tell us about WAMend and how did you get involved in this issue?
Okay. Well, WAMend, actually the Washington Coalition to Amend the Constitution is what we really are. It's just kind of long. WAMend is a coalition of organizations, and the people who created this grassroots organization, some of them had been involved in trying to get a resolution through the state legislature for 4 years before. And about a year and a half ago, they finally got frustrated after it had passed the House for 2 years in a row, but not the Senate. And they said, well, I guess we're going to have to do this the more challenging way, and that is to do a citizens initiative. So to be able to do the citizens initiative, that core group of volunteers started going around to various organizations and speaking to those organizations and trying to find people who those organizations could either become a member of WAMend and send a representative to sit on the steering committee, or they could simply be an endorser of what the idea of the initiative was. So I happened to hear Dorothy Van Soest, who was one of the early volunteers who had worked on the state legislature. And she spoke to a group that I was a member of and still am, the Evergreen Democratic Club in Burien. She was our luncheon speaker one day, and I was so inspired by the idea, I volunteered to represent that group, and I started coming to the steering committee meetings. And that was about a year ago, March, just this month. So I started learning a lot about this issue and caring more and more about it. And we started gathering signatures on simply a sign-up sheet for people who wanted to become aware of this issue and to start getting our emailed newsletter. So I started signing people up and talking to the public about it and getting an interesting reaction, which by and large was overwhelmingly positive of, yes, let's get big money out of politics. I'm feeling my vote is not nearly as important as it used to be because there's too much corporate money drowning out my voice, is the attitude that we ran into over and over again. And in fact, many people just assumed that I was asking them to sign the petition when it was really just our sign-up sheet because we hadn't filed the petition yet. So that's how I started with WAMend and this organization. And then, as time went by, the organization grew and grew, and we picked up more organizations, endorsers, and members to where now we have about 80 organizations who have done one or the other. And that's the backbone of what WAMend is grassroots organizations who've come together, a wide variety of faith-based MTA chapter affiliates, Move to Amend chapter affiliates. We've got about 10 of those that are members of WAMend. Community organizations, both political and non-political, and just a real wide variety of organizations have comprised WAMend now.
All right, so you are at the process where you have an official initiative out there gotten through the state. Can you talk about that and what specifically will the initiative do?
Sure. We filed the initiative after much thought and deliberation, but we decided to go for it anyway because we just could feel there was such a momentum with people in the state of Washington who wanted to see this happen. And 14 other states in the country their state legislatures had passed resolutions and gone on record wanting to see an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and 2 more states had actually passed citizens' initiatives on the ballot, Montana and Colorado. And if this passes, if this gets on the ballot and passes in Washington State, we'll be the 17th state in the country. So we decided to do it because there was such a feeling of momentum about, corporate power needs to be tamed here. And what this will do is it will urge our congressional representatives to bring an amendment, to bring a bill in Congress, and to work with Congress to pass a bill that says what we want to see a national bill say that will lead to an amendment is corporations are not people, money is not speech, all political contributions must be regulated and disclosed. We would like those 4 things. And when the day comes that Congress people debate what this bill will look like, we hope that that's what they say and that it starts to reverse this trend that is clearly diminishing our democracy.
It doesn't seem like it's really that radical of demands. Seems
I don't think so.
Pretty tame.
Yeah, when you say corporations are not people, it reminds me of Ashley Sanders' speech, who's an Move to Amend national speaker, when she said that she often gave her speech about this to elementary school kids. You remember that? And one little boy said when she said corporations are not people, he looks at her and he says, "Duh." Yeah, it is a duh. One would think that we would know that, and people do know that. What this is all about is a long history of precedent cases that started back in the mid-1800s, where corporations decided and that they wanted and needed standing, as persons have standing, so they could enter contracts with each other, so they could sue and be sued, and so on and so forth. So in the initial how this came about and built over the decades to Citizens United in 2010 was a series of Supreme Court decisions that gave piece by piece another piece of personhood, of legal personhood. So those rights, the right of free speech, search and seizure, all kinds of rights were gradually attributed to corporations. So is very, very briefly what has led to the mess that we're in today.
And why an amendment? Is there any other way to tackle this, or is that the last
The other,
option?
that's a good question. I often get that. And the other logical alternative is to have Congress pass a law that then the Supreme Court could once again overturn and say it was unconstitutional. So it's sort of a catch-22 in that any law that would be passed the Supreme Court with our 3 branches of government could always overturn and call unconstitutional, and it would be meaningless, which is why we have to do an amendment to the Constitution. They cannot overturn an amendment to the Constitution. It's part of the Constitution now.
So this is, as you just pointed out, this is really part of a bigger movement. This is just our state.
Absolutely. And this is all about raising the consciousness of the American people, state by state, city by city, and this has been happening now really ever since 4 months after Citizens United was handed down in January of 2010. 4 months after that, Move to Amend as an organization actually formed and started their work. David Cobb, Caitlin Saposi Belknap, and others saw this decision coming. David's an attorney and ran for president as a representative of the Green Party a number of years ago. So they were watching the Supreme Court, and they knew that when and if this decision got handed down, they would start this nationwide organization called Move to Amend. And they're headquartered in Northern California, and they have done an incredible job of finding people across the country to sign a petition, sign a petition that's not a legal petition. It's on their website, simply to voice their opinion, again, that corporations are not people, money is not speech, and we need to regulate contributions and disclose them. So they now have over 150, approaching 200 affiliate chapters across the country. I know they've had over 300,000 people sign and indicate their agreement that this needs to be done, and they preach. The leaders of Move to Amend know very well and have schooled us. We follow them very closely philosophically. That this is a social movement that we need to fan the flames of. Because when we look at the history of our country, no amendment has ever happened until and unless there was great social pressure. That the population, Jill Q. Public, could see and was outraged that something was drastically wrong on, racism, whatever, slavery, the women's vote, suffrage, issue after issue became an amendment eventually to the Constitution after prolonged public displeasure with varying degrees of violence and bloodshed before that amendment got on the books. The quickest one to pass was when people had a crazy notion that if you're old enough to die in Vietnam, you should certainly be old enough to vote. So that's when that amendment happened. In fact, that was the last one to go on the books officially, I think, the 17th, changing the voting age from 21 down to 18. And that happened very quickly because obviously the war in Vietnam and previous wars, if you are old enough to die for your country, you certainly should be old enough to vote. And that was sort of a no-brainer, and that passed within, I think, 6 months or so. Other amendments have taken years.
You mentioned multiple times Citizens United. Can you talk a little bit about what the effects of that have been? It's a very positive, happy-sounding name, Citizens United. I mean, who wouldn't want to get behind that?
Right. Well, that's what we call spin. And that decision it's got a complicated history that I'm not going to go into in great detail, but it was the final straw, and probably not the final straw, unfortunately, but another brick in the dam that basically said that corporations should be able, in all ways, to act as people. So the major part of that is allowed the creation of super PACs. And the super PACs are a separate channel, if you will. Think of this as two different channels of how political campaigns get funded. The channel that we're all familiar with is that we can contribute to a candidate's campaign or to an issue campaign, and those contributions are regulated and disclosed by the Public Disclosure Commission. For example, here in the state of Washington, you can go to pdc.gov and you can see public records of all contributions made by of anyone to political campaigns for the last number of decades. So that's how we traditionally have contributed to making politics happen. With Citizens United, another channel separate, and it's by law supposed to be very separate, was opened up, and that called a super PAC, and it allowed for people to give money to those organizations, and both the Democrats and the Republicans formed organizations that would accept money and did not have to be disclosed and could be used for whatever purpose those individuals who formed that super PAC wanted to use it for. Usually and often, the monies are used for negative attack ads on radio, television, print, and will often attack the opponent of a candidate. Now, the candidate might say, I've got no control over what those people over there are doing, and I can't help if they're attacking my opponent. I don't tell them, and by law, I cannot tell them how to spend that money. And they're right. They, by law, can't. That's supposed to be a very strong curtain between those two organizations, if you will. But in many cases, that's with a wink and a nod. And but it enabled, so Citizens United enabled the super PAC to come into existence and to accept whatever amount of money from organizations to fund those efforts. And John Nichols and Bob McChesney recently, a few months ago, came through Seattle on their 40-city tour across the country to promote their book, Dollarocracy. And it's an excellent book that traces the development of, or I should say the devolvement of how the media companies have become fewer and fewer as they've gobbled each other up. So now you've got, 5 or 6, mega giant media companies owning most of our media in the country. And the effect of that, coupled with, say, Citizens United as an example, is they say in their book, and they've documented this, that a media company can have anywhere from 40 to 60% of their annual revenue be from political super PACs. And that translates into attack ads, by and large. So studies have shown, as they talk about in their book, studies have shown that the more that the public hears negative attack ads, the more they tend to stay home and don't go to vote. The more they feel, my vote won't make a difference. I might as well stay home. Well, that is another planned method of disenfranchisement and losing our vote. The fewer people that vote, the greater the chances that corporate interests will win. And that is exactly the process by which we are losing our voice in this country and losing our democracy, and why we have to change this and stop it.
So your organization is out collecting signatures for Initiative 1329. Can you talk about that a bit?
Well, it's certainly exciting. I have many sleepless nights. And people are coming on board all the time. We have about 3,000 people now in our database who get our email and go to our website, which is www.wamend, that's WAMEND.org. Please go there and check it out. We have area captains across the state. We started out with 13 areas being created geographically, and now that's been mushrooming into about 20 now. And we've got team leaders in each section, and then volunteer petition gatherers in each of those geographic areas. So across the state, we have local organizations who are petitioning at grocery stores, farmers markets, events, entertainment events, ball games, whatever, wherever people gather, ferry lines, on the ferries, whatever, wherever people gather, you'll see petition boards going around. And this is really, Mike, both a nonpartisan issue. It's way beyond bipartisan. It's really a nonpartisan issue. And we're having a poll done right now. We'll have the results in about 10 days. But other polls in the country, and in fact, voting results, like in Montana and Colorado, where it went to a popular vote, shows that 75 to 85% of that vote, and that's what we expect it will be here in the state of Washington, feel that corporations are not people, money is not speech, must be regulated, must be disclosed. So it's an overwhelming, in fact, I cannot think of an issue, except maybe should 18-year-olds be able to vote, that was so popular. It's visceral, and I think it is that way because I think when it all boils down to it, we as individuals start at a very young age of having just an internal sense of knowing what is fair and what is not fair. If you've raised a child, they start telling you about what's fair and what's not fair at about 2 years old. They know what's fair and what's not fair. And we never, ever lose that. We might get confused, but to have a sense of a moral sense of what's fair and what's not fair drives much of our, behavior towards each other. And that's what I think is at the very heart of this fight. It's not fair that my vote is being boiled down to meaning much less than a large amount of money and corporate interest and influence. It is not fair that politicians have their jobs paid for and guaranteed term in and term out. That's just not fair. We think, we like to believe that we have a democracy where I can elect somebody and they're going to go to Congress and they're going to represent their district. And I'm sorry, but that's not happening these days. They represent the people who funded their last election or who are going to fund their next election. And that is not fair. We all know that. And now we have to fight to change that, because in the meantime, so many rules and regulations and resolutions and lobbyists have changed the rules of the game as to how our government is operating, and the citizens have been asleep at the wheel. We've let that happen. And now some of us are starting to wake up, and more and more and more of us have to wake up, or we will not have a democracy to leave our children and grandchildren. We will have an oligarchy where we have a country run by the most wealthy. And I know that that's not fair, and that the American population does not want that. And neither do a lot of rich people, as a matter of fact. They know that's not fair as well. So we're all caught up in this machine that we have to figure out a way to stop and change. And I'm not against corporations. Corporations drive this economy. But but it's like Again, when you've raised children, and I certainly have, you can say to your child, I love you and I will always love you, but right now I do not love your behavior. And you begin to understand that there is a distinction. So yes, I appreciate corporations and employers because they give jobs, they give our economy. I'm an entrepreneur myself. I have 2 businesses that I run and do, and I think that's really important. But I think it's overstepping the bounds when a corporation is paying too much money and buying elections and politicians. That's the behavior that I do not like.
And we saw that with the passing of Citizens United, that it was just a phenomenal increase in the amount of money that was going into these campaigns. So just a couple minutes left. So your organization, WAMEND, has until, I believe, June 25th to raise 300,000 signatures, which on the one hand sounds overwhelming, but with a lot of people going out there and just collecting 25 or 50 or 100 signatures on one of those sheets.
Right. That would happen. And that would be great. And we are looking for more and more volunteers. We'll be getting more and more events going. So look to our website, first of all, wamend.org, for events where people can come and be signature gatherers, sign up on it, and we'll have our ground leaders get a hold of you or just show up at the events. Like we're going to be going to the baseball fields and soccer and the stadiums here in Seattle, just as one example. So when that happens, just join us.
And people can also download the petition.
Yes, they can download it off of our website, get it printed at a commercial printer because it has to be the large 11 by 17 size on both sides.
That's kind of important.
Very right.
Some people, I guess, were doing 8.5 by 11. Yeah.
Mention, if I can, real quick, a young man by the name of Jason Ritchie, who is first time out of the box running for Congress. He's running for Dave Reichart's seat. And a few months ago, I met him, and he was saying, nobody knows me. And I said, well, I know of a way you could get known real quick, and that's to make this issue a central part of your platform. He came back to me a few months later, and he said, I did that, and you were right. I carry the petition. People sign it all the time. And this is the most exciting issue that I could have gotten involved in. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, with that, we're pretty much out of time. We're talking with Libby Carr. She is campaign manager for wamend.org and Initiative 1329, the We the People initiative. And again, how can people find out more about your organization?
Just go to our website and wamend.org, WAMEND. There is a sign-up section where you can get into our database and read all about it. You can send me an email. I keep my personal phone number and email there, and I'm more than happy to talk with the public about this issue, get you plugged in.
All right. Well, with that, we're unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.